Right, attitude and personality questionnaires and surveys. There's just a few things that will be useful for you to be aware of in these sections. First off, when you make a survey, one of the most common ways people answer surveys is through the usage of scales. In fact, a number of you have probably used scales in the past. We've definitely used scales in our assignments so far. So, what do you use scales for? Well, if you ask a question that requires an opinion, a lot of surveys will have a scale, say from 1 to 5, to give an answer. For example, how often do you pick up litter that you find outside? Never, sometimes, always, 1, 3, 5. For the most part, there's not too much to talk about here, but you do want to make sure that you're aware of that you are careful to make your scale meaningful and not too inconsistently interpreted. For example, how do you feel about going to the dentist? 1 to 5, good to bad. What is this question asking? Are they asking, do you feel guilty when you go to the dentist because you don't floss very often? Are they asking, does the dentist make you feel nervous? Are they asking, do you think your dentist is attractive? Are they asking whether or not the dentist makes you feel nauseous, or does it give you vertigo? And maybe the answer choices themselves aren't very useful. So when you're putting together a scale, it's very important to make sure that your scale and your question are written in ways that are consistent. This is because if you give your survey to 500 people, you don't want to get 500 different interpretations of what the question and the scale meant. So just be careful there. Another thing to know is that people tend to respond with a medium answer. So they kind of start with 3 and move up or down based off of what they want to say. So you want to be careful to avoid or just be aware that that could be a potential issue. If, for example, you want to avoid it, there are some things you can do. For example, you can have people write in a number instead of circle the number, and they'll tend to be a little bit less prone to that mediumness. Okay, so one phrase you will hear often in research that may be confusing is the phrase validated questionnaires. What does that mean? Well, in research, we can put together a survey in just a couple of minutes. And, people do this all the time. If you've ever taken any one of those surveys that tell you what sort of, what Harry Potter house you're from, or what star sign you are most like, or what your favorite color should be, or like any sort of Facebook quiz like that, you'll know that it's not hard to put together a survey. But how do we know that these surveys have any sort of meaning to them? The way scientists actually do this makes a lot of sense. They put together a series of questions that are based on the idea at hand. So maybe they want to make a questionnaire about happiness. So they put together a bunch of questions that relate to happiness. How many times did you smile today? How many times did you laugh today? Do you feel positive? When you look at other people, do you feel angry or happy? When you eat, do you enjoy eating? So just a bunch of questions that could have to do with happiness. Then they have people answer the survey, and then they do a type of analysis called a factor analysis. That sounds really crazy, but really all it is it's checking how well do the questions go together. Then you get rid of the questions that don't work there. So presumably you will get a list of maybe 7 or 8 questions where all 7 or 8 questions kind of work together, and that seems to suggest that they're all measuring the same thing, and the remaining questions aren't very useful, so you get rid of them. And then you start over. Maybe you get rid of those questions and add in more questions, and you do that over and over and over again until you have a questionnaire that you're satisfied with, that you believe has validity. Now, when you are putting together questions in a questionnaire, especially for an opinion-based survey, but also for a personality survey, you want to be careful about a framing effect. You're probably aware of what a framing effect is if you've taken an intro psychology class. It's just that the way you talk about something can drastically affect how people feel about it. So if you say that your frozen yogurt is 20% fat, that's not going to be as attractive as a frozen yogurt that's 80% fat free. The same sort of thing can happen with the way you ask a question. So think about this. Which would you what would you rather say here? Question 1. Should violent criminals be punished more than people committing fraud? Yes or no? Most people would probably say yes. Violent criminals sound much worse than fraud. What about this question? Should CEOs who underpay their employees by a total of $1 million go to jail longer than someone who robbed a gas station at gunpoint? In that case, you probably would say, yeah, those CEOs should go to jail for much longer than a gas station robber. But the thing is, if you think about it, these two questions are almost the same question. Yeah, they're written differently, but they're kind of asking the same bit of information. The difference in the way the question was written can drastically affect which answer you're going to give, which side you're going to be on. But you can see how the framing is what really is causing your result there. So when you're putting together these questionnaires, it's important to try and be in the middle, ambivalent. You don't want people to answer the questionnaire based off of how you wrote it. Instead, you want people to answer the questionnaire based off their real opinions. So be careful about framing questions, unless you want them to be framed in a certain way, of course. Okay, another thing you can do to make sure your surveys work well is utilizing reverse coding. Reverse coding is a very simple tactic. If people are taking surveys with a bunch of different questions, what you can do to make sure they're actually paying attention is to have some of the questions be backwards. What do I mean? Well, here we've got a series of questions about playing video games and how much people like playing video games. So they've got questions like, um, I was absorbed in my gaming, or I was really drawn into my gaming. So a higher number here means that they liked the gaming more, because they would more strongly agree. But down here we have reverse coded questions. I felt annoyed when playing the game. The game experience was demanding. So in this case, a higher number means that they enjoyed the gaming less. Why would we need these sort of questions? Well, imagine a person who's just going through and circling 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. If that person says 4 for these kinds of questions and 4 for these kinds of questions, you know they're not paying attention, because you know that they just wrote the same answer regardless. A person who is actually paying attention would put 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and then here 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and then back to 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. In this way, the reverse coding of the questions makes it easy to check whether people are paying attention. Okay, just a couple little things that you might also be aware of or concerned about when you're putting together surveys. First of all, it's important that people are willing to complete a survey. And I'm not talking here about coercion. Really, I'm just talking about whether or not they want to do it. Sure, you can walk up to anybody, ask them for the permission to do the survey, and have them do it. But if they don't care, or if they're not interested, they might just give you whatever answers. This is a pretty common problem when you're doing research on like high schoolers or college students, because maybe they don't want to participate and they're just doing it because they have to. Another thing you have to be careful about is truthfulness. So a lot of times research has trouble because folks don't want to talk about the things that are going on in the study. For example, if you are asking people personal things that involve their sexuality or their relationships or something that might be embarrassing about them, they probably won't want to give you honest answers, and so it can be really difficult to get surveys about that information. Lastly, you want to be careful about validity. There's lots of things that could affect your validity there, and honestly, those last two would affect your validity. So, how can we make sure that validity stays at least a little intact? Make sure your survey isn't ridiculously long, or if it is, make sure that people benefit, that they're getting paid for their time. Make sure that the questionnaire doesn't require a bunch of effort. You can't really expect people to take a 2-hour long strenuous test of their intelligence for a couple class credits. Finally, make sure that your survey is reasonable. If you're having people complete a survey that requires that they closely pay attention to a video, and they're just doing it on their phone, well, maybe the phone's too little. Maybe they're doing it while they're walking around or on the bus, and that's distracting. Just be aware, people completing your survey may not always be as interested in your research as you are. Thank you.